Okay. Welcome everyone to this conversation on the new left in Chile in comparative perspective. We have the pleasure of having with us Daniel Matamala, who's a Chilean journalist who got his MA in political journalism at Columbia University. He's currently the anchor person in Chilevisión Evening news. He also writes op-ed contributions for La Tercera and the Spanish edition of the Washington Post. To this conversation on the new left. So if you want to kind of start, and then we'll take it more of a conversation format.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I don't know if your audience is Spanish language or English language?
I think mixed.
Okay.
Portuguese as well.
Okay, Portuguese as well.
And Italian. Okay.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for being here. I want to say, I guess, a few words before starting. I have learned just a few hours ago about the Karen Poniachi, who was the head of the Columbia Global Central Office in Santiago, has passed away. She was a very bright personality in this organization, and
she organized this event. This is the last event she organized with us.
We were talking with her just because the organization of this event. So I want to give some words about her example and her contribution to this center and to this university. That saying, I'm here to ask questions. I understand in the days that I have been here that there's a lot of interest about what's happening in Chile, which used to be probably a more bored country. And
Fomen.
Yeah, and there's more international attention on Chile because of the issues of the last years, and also what is happening with several situation in the politics of Latin America, especially the different lefts that are in Latin America. Someone talk about the new left or the democratic left or the young left, and there's a lot of definition. But it will be interesting to have a conversation about that from my perspective, that is of a journalist that is working every day in the news and talking with the people that are leading the political projects, especially in Chile.
So you don't want to have opening remarks? Do you want me to start?
Yeah, I will start with something. I think that it's interesting to understand where this new government in Chile came from. Like 11 years ago, the today president, Gabriel Boric, and the most relevant person in the government, like spokesperson Camila Vallejo or the Minister of Social Development, Giorgio Jackson, were in the streets leading the students' protests 11 years ago. And this protest came to a shock to a country that was used by 20 years to a very stable political environment in which the Concertación, a central-left government coalition, and the right-wing that was mainly in the opposition were the two political coalitions. 20 years in which the economy has grown, the poverty has fallen in a very rapid, in a very quick way, and it appears to be a very stable situation. And these leaders were the first to lead a very strong popular mobilization in the streets in Chile in year 2011. And they do it with a motto that was no al lucro. It means no to profit, but profit in a negative way to put it. And this motto and the leadership of these young students were capable to talk to a very wide part of Chilean society, because no al lucro means no to student debt. That was the first problem of the students and at that time. No to the abuse of the markets, not to corruption scandal, not to the very bad pensions that were paid by the privatized social security system. So they were not just the students in the streets, but were their parents protesting because they have debts, and the parents of their parents protesting because they don't have a good social security system. So what was in the beginning just a protest of students become a protest of great part of the country. And after that protest in 2011, 2012, these leaders were able to go to Congress to form a political coalition that was called the Frente Amplio, the Broad Front, in coalition with the Communist Party. They make Apruebo Dignidad. And finally, the past year, in a very, very surprise way, they were able to gain the presidency, to win the presidency in the presidential election with Gabriel Boric. And it was really surprising because Boric was running at the first time just as a symbolic run. He even has a lot of difficulty to even have the signatures to be able to be candidate. And then he won in the primaries Daniel Jadwe, that was the favorite in the left-wing primaries. Then he was in the second place in the first round, and after that he won the election against Jose Antonio Castro, who was the candidate of the radical right. And so this group of former students, very young, 35, 36 years, were suddenly in the government. And they have been there for the last 6 months, and we can talk about what have been the problems of this new kind of government. But I think there's a very unique experience, both in Chile, in Latin America, and probably in the world. There's Boric is today the youngest leader, the youngest head of government leader in the world, I understand, with only 36 years. And there is an example of a generation that make a journey together from the classrooms in the universities to the streets, to the Congress, and to the government of a country in just a decade. And I think that's pretty remarkable as an experience.
So let me be a little bit provocative with your interpretation. So there were a prior generation, if you go back in the past, the APRA in Peru, Acción Democrática in Venezuela had a similar birth coming from a student leader that became parties and made it to government. Well, in the case of APRA, didn't for a long time, but in the case of Acción Democrática, they did. So in that thing, what is unique is that it's a moment where the university students are probably less of an elite than at that period in time. The other thing that I find less unique, if you take a comparative perspective about Chile, is that outsiders are winning everywhere. So the trait that Boric had, he has two traits that I think make him win the election, because it was a very divided vote in the first round. One is that he was an outsider, and there was a huge polarization between him and Castro, so it was more the vote that you didn't want than the vote that you want. And the second, that Chile came from what you call Distancia Social, right? From this moment, this crisis that you described. And at a personal level, he connects with people. I'm not sure the party or the coalition connects with people. He connects with people. But I think those things, I mean, the personal connection makes him pretty unique across the continent at the very least. But the polarization that brought him to the presidency, that is not so unique. You know, Castillo in Chile, in Peru, got to the president for a similar reason. You know, you got to two choices, people dislike Fujimori more than him. So to what extent do you think this is not part of a larger experience? You are seeing it now in Brazil with Bolsonaro and Lula, who are kind of not well known in both cases. And what's peculiar about Chile? So how do you link from the social mobilization that you described to this as being a different experience?
This is interesting because, of course, like polarization and the willing of the people of something new was a big part of what happened. We previously to Boric, we have two presidents, Michelle Bachelet and Sebastián Piñera, that were in a loop. Like was Bachelet first, then Piñera, then Bachelet, then Piñera. So 16 years in which there were two presidents repeating itself. So there was obviously an idea that something new was necessary. But I think that the interesting thing is that Boric won the election because, yeah, he was an outsider. Yeah, he was not part of the traditional coalition, but also because he looks more moderate than other alternatives. In the primary, in the left-wing primary, there were two candidates. Daniel Jadwe, who was the mayor of Recoleta, which is a district in Santiago. He was very popular in the polls against Boric, but was really not so popular. Like when he presented when he started to run, he has like an 1% in the polls. And during the campaign to the primaries, Boric was able to put himself as the reasonable one, as the moderate one, the one that, for example, says very clearly that he is totally against what's happening in Venezuela and Nicaragua, and that he really thinks that there are violations of the human rights in these countries, and this is not acceptable, no matter if this government are left or right. And Jadwe was not so clear about it. Also, Jadwe show a more confrontational personality, more confrontational character, especially in the presidential debates. And Boric was the opposite, was like the calm guy, the one that was very, very moderate and was polite in his way to say things. And finally, in a very surprise, in a surprise, he was able to win to Jadwe, basically because more moderate people, more moderate citizens, vote for him against Jadwe. And in the runoff, the same happens. Like the other candidate was José Antonio Castro, who's part of the radical right. He is a follower of Bolsonaro. And he has a program, especially in the first round, that was very radical. He said that he wants to make abortion illegal in all cases, including rape. That he wants to eliminate the Ministry of the Woman. He wants to make a coordination of Latin American countries in order to prosecute what he called the left activism. So he was a very radical candidate, and both in the way that he presented himself in his program, and also in the way that he was like running in the campaign. So against Boric won because he was viewed as many as, yes, someone new, someone that was not of the establishment, an outsider, but a more moderate one, someone that was not so radical. And there was a huge mobilization, especially of women and young women, especially against Cast and for Boric, because they think that Cast will be like a setback to many advances that women has in the country. So I think that's interesting, because like he showed that there was a will for new things. That was obviously a protest vote against traditional parties, and traditional coalitions, but also looking for someone that was not so confrontational.
I have a follow-up and then I'll open to questions. So you're telling us, I think this is fascinating, that the reason why Boric won is because the Chileans are moderate. Like the Chileans have a tradition of being moderate, and despite the estallido and everything, they continue to be moderate. And therefore they prefer Boric in all instances when he was the moderate one. So how can you relate that both to the result of the plebiscite on the Constitution, and second, to the difficulties that Boric has to govern?
Yeah, well, I think that the result of the constitutional referendum is again a demonstration that there is a broad moderate electorate in Chile, because for many reasons, for many different factors, the proposed draft of the convention of the new constitution was viewed for many people as radical. We can discuss if this is true or not, whatever. But for many people, they say, okay, there is a group that we elected with many hopes, because there were citizens more like us, people that work as in the communities, that were not part of the traditional elite, put a lot of faith in what this convention will do. But very quickly, people start to look at this convention as another elite that was very self-centered, that totally out of touch what was happening with the life of the citizens, and that were talking about things like the rights of the atmosphere and the rights of the nature and many things that, yeah, it could be interesting as concepts, but were not what the people were talking about. So I think that the convention looked to many citizens to just a radical group, with radical ideas, an elite that was not in touch with what people want. And I think that the moderate vote go against the constitution, and I think that was a relevant part of what happened. And also the protest vote. I don't think this is in all last Chilean elections, the option that won always is the one that against the government or against what is perceived as the power. The last time that a coalition won a re-election was the first government of Bachelet in 2006. After that, in every presidential election, the opposition has won. Right, left, right, left, right, left. And in the local election, also the opposition won, like every 4 years. When was the referendum to say if we want a new constitution, the option, yes, we want a new constitution, won by a landslide, 78%. And it was the option that was seen as opposed to the government, that was Piñera in this moment. And now Boric is the government, and the opposition or the protest vote was saying, okay, against the constitution, which is what Boric want. So I think it's a combination of people is very upset for many years, and they are saying, we don't want more of this, we want change, we don't, whatever the elite that is in the government, we reject that elite, no matter if it's left or right. But at the same time, we don't want anything too radical. So it's maybe a contradiction, but it's interesting as a way to look what the Chilean citizen wants.
Questions, comments? Yes. And please introduce yourself. Yes. And I forgot to do it. I'm the director of the institute.
Well, I'm Juan. I'm from Chile. Thank you, Anna, for being here. So from what I've heard, President Boric and from yourself, one can say that the new left in Chile can be defined like in three very broad terms, right? One is like economic or fiscal responsibility. He has remarked that. Two is like openness. He actually said that in the here in Columbia like a few weeks ago. And the third is what you say is a distance from the authoritarian left, which will be like the opposition, at least in the left. However, and that's the discourse, right? However, what we see today in Chile is that with regards to, for example, with openness to trade, they put in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the second in charge, the undersecretary. It's an academic who is the most staunch opposer to openness to trade, essentially. His whole coalition supported the withdrawals of pension funds, which is, by most economists think that would be like the definition of economic irresponsibility, right? And then their main allies in the Congress, or one of their main allies nowadays, is the Communist Party, which is safe to say that they have sympathies for the authoritarian left in Chile. At least that's the situation of the Communist Party. So how do you think they will survive, this court will survive in this tension? Do you think this is because of the political situation in which his coalition is in? They have like a super minority in the Congress, or do you think it's something else?
Well, let me put these three attributes. I don't think that openness to commerce is someone that is like in the core of Frente Amplio or President Boric or Apruebo Dignidad. I think they are very suspicious about free commerce. And you can see what is happening now in the negotiation for the ratification of the TPP 11 treaty, which has been yesterday ratified by the Chilean Congress, but the government is holding his signature. So it's very clear that there are tensions, and that there is not a clear definition, because there is a tension between Chile is an open economy, needs inversion because we have a scenario of possible recession next year, but at the same time there are ideological, I think, lack of enthusiasm about the idea to be more open to international commerce. So I think that I will not define that as one of the characteristics of this new left of the Frente Amplio. In fiscal responsibility, well, I think that as many political parties right now, you want to be very responsible when you are in the government, but you don't want to be when you are in the opposition, because it's very easy to have votes promising, okay, everyone can withdraw the funds that they have for their pensions, and I don't care if that causes inflation or if that causes problems for the pension. But I think that's in every political party in Chile, and it was very clear during the campaign that finally President Boric supported the last of the retiros, as they were called, even if he had said before that he was against them, just because like they were so incredibly popular, and was very difficult for a candidate to say no to something that was so popular, and he has said that he was that it was a mistake to do it. And of course now he's in the government, and of course he need to stop this kind of projects. And the third thing is the romance with more authoritarian leaders in the left. I think that in that, like, the president has been very consistent for many years in saying that he is completely against the dictatorship in Venezuela and in Nicaragua, and the violation of the human rights. And yeah, in his coalition, maybe there are some difference. Even in the Communist Party are different lines. There are some more nostalgic lines, the more old leaders especially, that still has some kind of romance with this idea of the revolution in Latin America. But the more young leaders, I think they are very consistently now in the side of saying that you should respect human rights, and no matter what government is violating them. So I think even in the Communist Party, there's some difference about it.
Yes. I'm Laura. I'm from Colombia, but I've been living in Chile for 7 years. You mentioned, like, in your context, you mentioned first the right and left, like, polarization that we're living now in Chile. But you also mentioned, like, opposition have been winning every time there's an election. So little bit of what I was thinking, this is not anymore right-left discussion, is more of what I see what happened is the political class took over again with policy making. And I think now the Boric and this whole parties that he represents now has this challenge to overcome that situation. And with that context, what will happen next? Like now we have to pressure as society to make them a new draft, right? But it's not, now it's in the hands of the right wing, but it's still the discussion of political class policy making.
Yeah.
So how do we take that as a society, as Chileans, to pressure the right wing and the left wing to overcome that political crisis and actually start a new proposal?
It's a very difficult situation. If you see like the last election, you see first was Bachelet, but was with a very moderate center-left coalition. Then was Piñera, also with a moderate center-right. Then Bachelet with a more leftist coalition that included the Communist Party. Then Piñera with a more right-wing program. And then Boric, which obviously on the left of the others. What's next is very difficult to say because in this moment,
Castro seems to be the progression from hearing you.
Yeah, it's a possibility, but I think there are a lot of possibilities. There's also a new phenomenon that is the Partido de la Gente. Yeah, that's the party of, I don't know if in Spanish we have a distinction between gente and pueblo. At least in Chile, that is very telling. I think that the traduction is people, but pueblo is a more left-wing connotations. What gente doesn't have it. So Partido de la Gente is a populist center right. It's very difficult to define it. Party that won the third place in the last presidential election with a candidate that cannot even go to Chile. He was doing campaign from the United States because he has not paid like the alimony of their children. So he cannot go to the country because he will be arrested. And they do the campaign and they have 10% of the votes and they have a number of congressmen that are now deciding which side has the majority in the Congress in Chile. This is like more the center left or the center right. So they have enormous power right now. And they have a speech that is very unique. I think it's a kind of neoliberal anti-system speech because they say they are against the abuse of the powerful, against the abuse of the political elite, but they are also very free market, I will say, in their ideas. So there's a different phenomenon there. Yeah, there are different options, and the established elite is not being able to deliver. That's the big problem today. The government is not being able to deliver because they don't have majority in the Congress. They also are unexperienced. They don't have experience in the government, so they make mistakes, of course. But in the Congress, they have no options to pass any significant laws. And the opposition, after the result of the referendum, is now very powerful and is like going to attack and block like everything. So the situation right now is a stalemate. Well, in the United States, you know about stalemates in the government process. But and of course, what people are saying is that okay, the politicians of the elite are against fighting each other. No one is doing nothing about crime, about inflation, about the problems of the pensions, about education, about health. And well, so what will we do again? And of course, this new elite, the new left or the new elite of the Frente Amplio is in danger of being seen as just another aloof, distant elite of these young people that are very idealistic and they have a lot of dreams, but they don't know how to do the work. do the job. And this will be obviously a danger for them.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Sebastian from Chile. Thanks a lot for being here. I have a question, and it can be from your perspective as a journalist about narratives. So, yeah, basically, like countries in a way are also narratives. And Chile, if you think from the 90s, there was this like common narrative about like growth and like prosperity and like democracy, and it worked. Bad things, but at the end, the country grew a lot. We went out of poverty in many of the areas. And then as you started telling us at the beginning, in 2011, there starts this new narrative. It's like the system is not working, or growth is not enough, like we're so unequal. And in a way, that narrative starts to grow until Boris comes to power. We have the new constitution. And now in a way, that narrative is breaking, like the constitution was not approved. Many of the things that we thought were like for granted in the narrative, which is like how pension funds should work, how should the education system works, the relationship with communities, indigenous communities, it's not so clear. So what do you think is the current narrative? Are we lost in a narrative? What do you think could be a possible narrative?
Yeah, I will see that this is the situation right now. We don't have like a national narrative about what we are, what we want. And I think that probably one of the danger of the present situation is that I see a nostalgia in some groups on the elite, and especially in the economic elite, to say, okay, let's go back to September 2019. And the last 3 years were just kind of a nightmare. We went crazy out of nothing, and we should do exactly the same thing that we were doing before. And I think that is a big mistake, because the estallido happens because there was like a very deep feeling of abuse and of disappointment of the people about what was happening in Chile. And we cannot just say, okay, the last 3 years were nothing, and we should just do what we were doing before that. We need to find a new way. And that's pretty hard to do, because we are not talking to each other. Like, the political conversation is absolutely full of insults, and politicians are obsessed with Twitter and with what is the way to look more strong today, and to do stronger things, and to be very even abusive in the form that you talk to others, because this is the way that you gain attention. And when everybody starts to talk very in a very, when everybody
Loud.
when everybody starts to shout, you have to shout louder and louder and louder, and finally it's impossible to have a conversation.
Sorry,
Yeah.
only a follow-up question. What do you think of like the Frente Amplio narrative in terms of like, as Boric maybe said a couple of weeks ago, it's like at some point it's going to come, we're just going a bit faster, or it's about the content, or the people thought wanted that narrative, but now it's like, wait a moment, I'm not sure about this narrative, maybe it's not what I want. Yeah,
I think there's maybe a difference between, I will say that many of the things that the Frente Amplio wants for society are things that I think that probably are popular in society, like feminist rights, like environmental protection, like to have a new strategy of development that not only is based on exporting copper. I think that these things have some kind of resonance in the people, but the problem is a problem of urgencies. The urgencies of the people now are none of them, are basically crime and inflation, and this the people that are in the government, especially in the Frente Amplio, studied many issues, studied many and know about many issues, but probably the two issues that they don't know much about are crime and inflation, because are not like the flags that the new left is like they are relevant for them. Well, in the case of inflation, we have a minister of Ministro de Hacienda that is very experienced and is someone that is very competent in what he is doing. But what the people see in the government is that, okay, there are some well-intentioned guy, probably they have good ideas about what they want to do. But what I want today is that someone come here and say, okay, there is a solution for crime, there's a solution for inflation. And we know that when people started to ask for an easy solution for crime, for example, well, the bad ideas started to mount, you know, because we know what kind of easy solutions are for crime, and we know what the consequences are. So I think there's a gap between what the Frente Amplio is probably wanted to do or what they dreamed to do when they were in the government and the reality that they are facing right now.
Beatriz?
Well, first of all, Daniel, congratulations on the Maria Moors Cabot. My name is Beatriz. I'm originally from Spain, but I've lived for 10 years between Bogota and Caracas. And my question is related to the situation in Colombia, comparing Chile and Colombia. Because both have left governments, but we were mentioning conservative, more conservative or experienced ministers of finance. In the case of Colombia, Campbell, who was a professor here. So I would like to know what do you think about, do you think there are some similarities or differences, and what's the impact in the country?
Yeah, I think Colombia's cases is fascinating because it's more even unique. I think it's the first time that you can say there really is a left government in Colombia, in the history of the country. So it's very interesting to know what is happening there. I understand that there are some links between the ideas to have a new left in Chile and in Colombia. Boric and Petro has a good personal relationship. Because also Petro is saying is that he's now more moderate, that he's now not he has not ties with Venezuela. He has to distance himself from this more radical left. So I think he's doing something in a way similar. I don't know, and maybe you can tell us about how difficult it has been for Petro to try to have some achievements in the agenda in the first months.
So, well, my boss, Mauricio Cárdenas, who used to be the finance minister of Colombia, would be more appropriate. But I think there, I would think, weak signals. It has been just doing small changes that have been a bit, I think, worrisome for Colombians and for investors outside, some interventions in the energy sector. So, I don't know, he's been doing some things that might distance him from the position of the finance minister. But so I don't know if you
there's also the tension within the coalition, which is similar. So the tension that you described in Chile between the communists or the more traditional communists and the Frente Amplio. I mean, the coalition of Petro is also kind of quite divided at the moment. And it's a much larger coalition. So with his close coalition is divided, and then it's harder to sustain. He really basically put everyone but the Uribistas
in the case of Boric.
In
the case of Boric government, they also have a small coalition that is Frente Amplio and the Communist Party, and then a more broad coalition that is the Socialist Party and the Party for Democracy that were part of the old Concertación. And they are now more part of the government. After the referendum, they have a more.
But Petro put everyone but Castro and Paris, more or less. So it's the equivalent. So the conservative, the liberal, everyone is in. So it's even harder.
Yeah, but I think that's relevant also. What you do when you are a left leader that were going on a platform of very transformative reforms, and you have to govern, and you have to have a broad coalition, and you have to forget about probably more of the things that you want to do, and there a possibility of course of dissolution of your supporters, but you need to do it. And I think that probably Petro and Boric should have a good conversation about the problems that they are facing, because probably they're similar.
There was a question here. Yes.
Hello, my name is Santiago. I am from Chile. My question is about, you mentioned that Boric won because he was more moderate, more like a disposal to have a good conversation against the petition. And also you mentioned that right now everyone is, the person who wins in the journalism and the social media is the one who screamed the loudest.
Yep.
And the one. So considering that in the last referendum, Boric lost, what are the challenges in dialogue and everything in a politic world that all the news media, everything is promoting the one who screamed the loudest?
Yeah, well, I think that's important because I think there are clear signals that finally, as I said, people want change, but people also want moderation. And if you see like the polls, the leaders that are like the first in the polls are not the more radical ones. So I think that there's something that should be taking, because what happens in Twitter is not the reality of the country. And be popular in Twitter is not the same as having votes to be president when you have to have a 51% of the citizen voting for you. Last week there was a very special image that I think was very encouraging. That was that the mayor of Providencia, that is a right-wing politician, Evelyn Matei, was in an activity with the mayor of Santiago, which is from the Communist Party, Iracy Hasler, and with a member of the government, Nicolás Cataldo, who was also of the Communist Party. And Matei in one moment said, some days ago, I tweeted very, very harsh against Cataldo because of some things that he said in the past, but now we knew each other. He's a charming man and we can work together. And they were like hugging in the front of the cameras, the three of them. And I think, okay, maybe it's just political strategy, but if it's political strategy, well, very good. I mean, if this kind of gesture of good manners are part of the campaigns, and politicians, Matei, that is a presumptive presidential candidate for the right, is probably one of the possible presidential candidates of the right. If Evelyn Matei thinks that this will help his candidacy to have this kind of good manners, I think it's a very good sign, and I hope this kind of things could happen more.
But couldn't it bring people back to the kind of good manners that Chile between 1990 and 2019 was characterized by good manners? That's how the rest of the region saw it, like the left and the right sit at the table, discuss together. There were consensus on like trade liberalization, on things that in any other country were very divisive. In Chile, the left and the right were very civilized in talking to each other. They're still pretty distinct, but very civilized. So couldn't the population see, oh, they are more of the same?
Yeah, probably. But I think also that this situation in the 90s, especially, were a fake consensus. Because what happened there is that we don't have a full democracy. I mean, we have a government of the center left that has like a very huge popular support. When Eduardo Frei won the election, I think with a 57%, and the candidate of the right that was in this election, Arturo Alessandri, won like 26 maybe % of the votes. But these two coalitions have the same power because we have a democracy in which Pinochet was still the head of the army, so you can do anything against that. You can reform the constitution, of course, when you have a Congress that was even, because we have an electoral system in which the first coalition and the second coalition both elected one congressman in every district, the binominal system.
Yeah.
Where there was part of the Senate was decided, was appointed by the military. The military has four seats in the Senate. So yeah, it was consensus. Yeah, there was many good things about these years, of course, but also was the feeling that democracy is useless because I go to vote.
No,
and
I didn't say it was good or bad. I wasn't passing judgment. I was thinking that if you are a Chilean regular citizen, you don't discuss institutions all day. You don't care about, like, elected senators and the binominal system. You care about, as you said, the economy and crime,
Mm.
and whether somebody's solving your problems or not. And you think the prior guys didn't solve your problems, they seem to be on cahoots with each other. If these guys are not solving the problems and also seem to be on cahoots with each other because they love each other, okay, what's the change?
Yeah. I was just doing that. I think that it's very important to have consensus, but consensus that are democratic consensus. And I think that when we think about what happened in Chile in these years, we have to have in mind that was a very fake and artificial consensus about what is happening. Well, I don't think that anyone has the answer about how to look at the same time like something that is responsible and is capable to do the job and is moderate, but also is not part of the same elite of always. I mean, there's a equilibrium that is, of course, very difficult to achieve. And also, we are just talking about a government that is 7-8 months, excuse me. So there's a plenty of time. We don't know what will happen in the next 3 years. Maybe the government can take some relevant reforms. Maybe the economy is better and the situation of the citizens is better. I don't know if they maybe can be able to regain popularity, because it is just starting. And also all the last government in Chile has like a curve that is like, they started here, they very rapidly like lost popularity, and they have a
Rebound.
Yeah, rebound in the last year of the government many times. So when people perceive that the government is lacking power, they say, oh, they were not so bad. And now that I think about them, and former president tend to be more popular than presidents.
And current.
Yeah, some nostalgia, I think.
Daniel, the biggest support for the left parties in the past came
Please
from the.
introduce yourself, because
Yeah, I'm Jose from Chile. I'm a student in the journalism school. But the base support of the left parties came in the past from the lower classes.
Mhm.
And
that's not what Juan Pablo writes about.
yeah, well, we can talk about it, but at least in Chile, the poorest guys used to vote for the left parties.
Not in the 90s.
Well, we can debate about that, but
Well, there's a lot of data right now.
yeah, but there is a lot of data. I don't know. Elwin won with 63% of votes, so there were votes from the lower classes, and then Frey won with 58. Maybe the first right candidate who obtained votes from the popular classes was Joaquín Lavín in 1999, but then Piñera lost the election because male guys who were part of the lower classes in Chile. That's why he voted Colo Colo and also Chilevisión, because he needed to penetrate in that vote. So yes, in Latin America, the lower classes used to be represented by the left. You have the case of Brazil, the Peronists in Argentina. Well, the Peronists now in Argentina, because the Peronists in Argentina during the 90s was a right side.
But the
Peronist.
poor still vote the Peronist, so there's a pretty high correlation between social class and vote in Argentina, and I don't think that
No,
correlation
but
is that high in Chile.
I just want to talk about the left in Latin America. I mean, in Colombia, it is the same in some regions of Colombia, because the Juridivism had a very big support in some regions from the lower classes. But that's not my point. My point is the left is now trying to give new answers to those lower classes, because they began voting for the far right. In Brazil with Bolsonaro, the Christians from Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and the south of Brazil. In Chile, you could say during the campaign of José Antonio Castro, if you went to La Pintana or even other very popular sites, there was a huge support for José Antonio Castro in the lower places. And you said in your comment that the biggest issue that the society is facing now is maybe the security issue, the inflation, the economy, and the left don't used to have a solid answer for that issue. So what do you think is the path? in order to maybe the left recovering this space that had lost. Even if Lula wins in Brazil, Bolsonaro already had a big winning in Brazil in the Congress and the province governors. So what do you think should be the path for the left in Latin America in order to recover this side?
Well, Juan Pablo knows about this thing much than me, so it's difficult for me to speak about it now. Well, I think that's the problem of the left, not in Latin America, in the world. I mean, and it's very, very clear in.
Sorry, there is also immigration.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
I mean, it's like the same story that you have seen, like how the social democracy lost the popular vote in France and, well, even in Germany and in Italy and so many places. So I think that's a world situation that is coming to Chile. In the case of Chile, when you see the last presidential election, which is the last one when we can talk about clearly like political positions, Boric was still very strong in the more popular district of Santiago. He has his best results in very poor districts like La Pintana, Lo Espejo, Cerro Navia. So this, I will say that this left vote is still there. What happened in that election, in the Boric-Kast election, was more a division between center and periphery. That is probably something that is resonate also in the United States, because Boric won very solidly in Santiago. He won in Valparaíso, he won in the big cities with very strong majorities, but Kast won in the great part of the rest of the country, especially in the small cities and in more rural areas in the center south and in the south. So I think there was a first idea of how also is kind of a cultural division between the young people in the popular district in Santiago and what is happening in the rest of the country. But this election was also with voluntary vote, when roughly 50% of the citizens went to vote. The referendum for the constitution was the first time that again one was in Chile with compulsory vote, and that means that the participation was much higher, and we really don't know how this affected the results. We can think that there was a kind of silent majority that was not voting in the last election, that was maybe more moderate or more conservative, we really don't know, and they were relevant in the result of the referendum to put a 62% in the option no. But we don't have enough information about that because it's only one election and we don't have many answers about it. But I think that is a global phenomenon in which parts of the population feel that the left elites are talking about issues that they don't care about it, and that migration, crime, and this kind of preoccupation are not being delivered by the left. And of course, the right wing and the radical right is offering very easy solution to these problems. Solutions, of course.
Yes. I mean, it's not clear that they solved the problem. But
Yeah, of course, but they are.
That's their narrative.
Yeah, it's right.
So, Daniel, I think Boric, I don't know if willingly or unwillingly, or the government kind of conditioned their political agenda to the results of the referendum. I think that can be safely said. And so after the referendum and the results of the referendum, it's one would expect that they will start to like prioritize and make concessions, right? That would be like. So what do you think is going to be what do you think are going to be the priorities? I mean, in other words, what are they going to let go easily? Do you think, and what will they insist on? Because they have like tax reform, they also recently announced legalized abortion like without causals, which maybe it's not a good move given that.
Yeah, but I want to say,
And
Yeah.
this is
That was in
related
an interview with you.
to a question, sorry, to a question that somebody wrote to you on whether the coalition will survive, the coalition between Apruebo Dignidad and the Democratic Socialism, so which is related to your question. So,
yeah, no, I was going to say that it was not an announcement, I know, because I did the question to the minister, and and she just said, yeah, that is in our program. We have not changed opinion about that. We still think about that, but we will not like push a bill in the Congress in this year because we have other priorities. So it was not an announcement.
That's a priority.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the difficulty is that the government, of course, has to survive.
Yeah.
But also they have to move their agenda, and the two more relevant projects I have in the agenda is the tax reform and the pension reform, which I personally think that both are very necessary in Chile, both of them. We have a tax system that is completely unfair in our country. And it's what the OECD said, it's what the World Bank said, so I think there is a consensus about it. But of course, it's very difficult to do it right now. So probably they will need to wait for a better political moment, if there is a better political moment in some moment in the 4 years to push it. And also we have the constitutional problem, when we also don't have a solution about it. So probably the government has to like concentrate it in more small goals and projects that don't need to pass to the Congress in showing a better management of the everyday problems. Probably this will be like the more viable strategy for the next months, because like the political environment right now may be very difficult to advance in their reforms. What the question was?
it seems it's significant views within the government coalition on a number of issues, including the recent approval of the TTP 111. Do you think the coalition between Apruebo Dignidad and Democratic Socialism will survive? That was the question.
Yeah, it's curious because there is no coalition. there is a government with two coalitions, which is a very weird experiment.
But if both are in the government.
Yes, both are in the government and
coalition in the definition.
yeah, and Socialismo Democrático is now more strong in the government. You have the Ministry of the Interior, which is the most powerful post in the cabinet. So after the referendum, they Boric moved their pieces, so the Socialismo Democrático is more powerful now, and it's the only way because Apruebo Dignidad don't even have a third in the Congress. That means that they don't even have the minimum to survive of a government just with Apruebo Dignidad. They have no other chance than to be as broad as they can in the political coalitions.
Coming back to something that he said and something that you answered. So Apruebo Dignidad is 1/3 of the government. People vote for Boric because he was a moderate. And then maybe, and he did say.
A moderate compared to the other guy. I mean,
But that's to the other, to the guy on the left and the guy on the right.
Yeah.
And he did say here that there was an issue of speed. All right, that there was that you shouldn't go faster than the rest, but it might be that the rest are not going at any speed in the same direction. Is that a concern that you see the government like they would have to act differently? If that's
I don't agree with that expression about the speed, because obviously it's not just a kind of speed, it's direction. No, if your direction is not the same as the people are wanted right now. So yeah, I think Boric is very reflexive, very the self-criticism he practices a lot, but obviously the coalition is still in a state of shock. No one will believe that the referendum will be lost with such a landslide, 62% against. And I think that the political system is still trying to know what to do with that. The government is trying to see, okay, what strong still I have, and the opposition is saying, okay, what can we do with this power that we have now? And I think they are still in this kind of game.
But now they have the preferences of the voters, at least on that issue. There was compulsory vote, so you know who voted what.
Yeah.
So you know how the poor voted, you know how the municipalities with indigenous people voted. Like you have like a better map of preferences.
Yeah, you can say that in the referendum, everybody votes for the no. I mean, there are in almost every region, almost every city, almost every district, the reject vote was a majority. The problem is that what the reject vote means, we don't know, because it can mean a lot of things. It can mean, of course, I don't want the Constitution, or I don't want some aspect of the Constitution, or I don't like the work of the convention, and I like to say that the convention was not working good, and this is my option to say no to the convention. Or it can mean no to the government, or no to crime, or no to inflation, or no to immigration, or I don't know. There is a vote that is a moment in which the people can say they are against something. Against what exactly is very difficult to interpret. And of course, everyone interpreted that in the way that is better for his goals. I mean, for the opposition, of course, it's a vote of even of confidence for them. And the more interesting thing about it is what the right did in the campaign of the referendum. They disappear. The strategy of the political parties in the right was to disappear completely from the campaign. José Antonio Castro was not part of the campaign. He was in complete silence. Former President Piñera don't even say that he will vote for the reject option, because they knew that if Piñera said that he was against, that
People
would be a
would vote in
great
favor.
support for the effort. So he don't speak for months. He was totally disappeared. So I think that say that, oh, people vote for the program of the right when the right was out of the campaign, I think that is not very, it's not the more logic conclusion of what happened. So we have a vote. We know that the people rejected the constitutional project, and that's it. We can, of course, do interpretation and doing research to know more about it, but just the vote does not say much.
But there are surveys, right? And so we know the plurinational part was particularly unpopular. I mean, there are dimensions that we know were much or less popular. And
yeah,
and there was a campaign emphasizing those dimensions as well. It's not that there was no campaign from the right. Maybe the parties of the right didn't call, but there were campaigns.
Yeah, according to the polls, of course, plurinationality was seen as a way to unfairness, to different laws between like indigenous people and the rest of the population, and that resonates very bad in the citizens. Yeah, this was one of the points. But again, you don't really know exactly if the people that mobilized to vote was because of this factor or not. You should have like, I think it's very difficult to make many conclusions about what happened in the referendum.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
No,
Yeah.
I already asked.
No, yeah.
No, I'm Sophia. I'm also from Chile. So I was just wondering, do you think a potential interpretation of the recent results could be that when the first referendum took place, Chile was arguably in a slightly better position economically, and even though there was still like concerns of crime, it wasn't as uncontrollable as it is right now, and that the second vote, maybe the average Chilean person is now more concerned about national issues such as the economy, inflation, crime, drug trafficking, and all those issues, and the constitution has now become like their secondary concern, whereas the government's still like or until the referendum and during the campaign, was still largely focusing on that, and that's maybe something that you think Chilean people maybe want to remove emphasis from, and they kind of are more concerned with the more pressing issues. And the second point to that, specifically with crime, when Boric is so critical of the police force and different like importance of authority in the past, how difficult do you think it will be for him to get credibility in now fighting crime by using the police force?
In the first, I would say, my interpretation is, and this is just an opinion, is more than the two referendums were a way to protest. And also in the first referendum, people can say, okay, we are against the Piñera government, we are against the elites, and this new constitution is the way in which we can change things and say things as they are not going well, and we will change it in a very strong way. And there was a lot of hope in that idea that the new constitution will be a force of change. This referendum has two questions. The first one is, do you want a new constitution that won with 78% of the votes? And also has two options: a new convention that was completely elected, or a convention in which 50% of the members of the convention were members of the Congress. And in this second question, 79% voted for the elected convention, and only 21% went to Congress. So it was a complete rejection also of the Congress and the political elite. So I think that was a protest vote that was protest with hope, because they think that they can be a good thing there. And I think that the 62% of the referendum of this year is against protests. Is again saying things are not going well, and the new constitution will not be a solution at all, and so we should reject it. So I think that in both cases there was a sensation of things going bad in the country, and that different options were seen as the better way to express this feeling of disappointment with the elite. And yeah, I think you are completely right. Of course, the government has a problem of credibility to fight crime, because they were very critical about how police use the force, with reason in many cases, because there were violation of the human rights in Chile. But I think they lack an alternative vision, an alternative realistic vision about how to do it when you are the government and you need to work with these police forces. In his campaign, Boric talked about refundation of the police in Chile. After that, he changed that and said, "Oh no, we have to reform." No, refundation is a change, and yeah, now they are trying to give every possible signal of support of the police, but of course they are not the more credible in this effort. So yeah, that also is a problem, because if the first preoccupation of people is crime, and if you see that the government is not the more able to work with the police to enforce security, of course the government is a problem.
I think that's going to be a problem for Petro as well. You want a comparison there, you have a good one. Okay, yes.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Mira, and I'm a student at the medical campus doing public health. I'm not from Chile, but I lived there for 6 months during 2019, so very interesting. And while I was there, I was very interested in reproductive rights and abortion and sort of just reproductive justice in general. And you mentioned it briefly, but I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about Chile and sort of the future of reproductive rights and abortion there.
Yeah, well, what we have since year 2017 is a law that authorizes abortion in only 3 cases, as you know. Yeah. And the Boric program said that they want to free abortion as a decision of the woman, as a reproductive right. And the Castro program said they want to ban abortion in every circumstance. So there were two very different ideas. Boric want, as I said, with a big mobilization of young women, that I think that was very important. And the constitutional project also said that there should be a right to abortion, and that a law will stipulate the exactly way in which this right can be enforced. And that was used by the campaign for some right-wing politicians to say, oh, the constitution will legalize abortion until nine months.
Yeah.
That was a lie, of course, but it has some traction, and probably it was important, especially in some conservative evangelic groups where this kind of threat that they will be abortions in 9th month were very frightening for them. So I think that probably in this situation, the law will not move for a couple of years because the government doesn't have the force or doesn't have the majority in parliament to enforce, to pass a law about it. In terms of public opinion, the last poll said that I think 33% is in favor of abortion as a right, and 54% said that the law as is right now should be maintained. So there is a majority for maintaining the law more than moving to a more liberal law. And what the government is doing is trying to a better enforcement of the law, because there's a lot of problems and issues. So the government, what is working is in things that don't have to pass in the Congress, so they can better enforce like that the right of a woman in these three causes are respected.
Okay. Any other comment, question? You have the last one. Okay, it's exactly
More of a personal question. So you interview a lot of people. So like we're talking about the new left. What kind of particular politicians or people that are involved in politics you think could emerge or could be good for the left, and what are the traits and what are the different characteristics that they have? You can choose maybe 2 or 3 people that
I'm very compromised.
Well, today
no pressure.
Yeah.
No pressure.
I thought it was more personal.
No, it's a good last question.
I
It's
think
not off the record.
yeah, I think today the left is mainly in the government, and they have obviously their more relevant leaders. I think a part of President Boric is Camila Vallejo, who's doing I think a very good job as the spokesperson of the government, and has a kind of discipline and of strategy that is very useful for the government, and I think she's doing a good job there. And you also have to see how the local leaders that the Frente Amplio has for the first time in the different districts are working. For example, Tomás Bogdanovich in Maipú, Macarena Ripamonte in Viña del Mar. I think there are young leaders that are doing executive jobs, so they are leading with the everyday problems of the people. I think it's interesting to know how their leadership evolved, because they could be, of course, leaders of the left in the years to come. And in the right to make also I think that there are also young leaders that are interesting. I am interested in what Javier Macaya is doing as the president of the UDI, which is the right-wing party. He's also a very young leader. I think is someone that is trying to make rational politics in a very difficult environment. and with a lot of pressure from radical sides of his party that want that they have a more strong position or a more critical position about the government, and he's trying to do politics. And I think that he's a leader that I will look closely, because I think that he's trying to do something useful from the right. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a good ending on a positive light. I want to thank you, Daniel, for coming here, all of you, for this interesting conversation on a day that, as you said at the beginning, is sad because we lost Karen Poniachik, who led the Santiago Global Center. We will organize something to honor her memory, so I'll keep you posted. Thank you all for coming, and especially thanks to you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Déjame decir que me pases por WhatsApp, porque si organizamos algo para Dani, para Karen, te voy a pedir por ahí.
Mira, saludar a Juan Pablo.
Viste, lo traje del